Today we have an incredible group of panelists, three panelists who I just think are amazing in what they do and what they've brought to the diversity, equity, inclusion space in terms of marketing and how we market and how we think about how we're selling products. I will start introducing our panelists, and I'll start with Freddy. Freddy Bharucha, if you don't mind coming up. He is the Senior Vice President of North America and Personal Beauty Care at Procter & Gamble. In his 30 years at P&G, he has worked in Asia, UK, and across the US. He is a passionate advocate for diversity, inclusion, equity mindset, and is a big champion of the Diversity Beyond Numbers framework in terms of how they work and lead their brands across the organization. Freddie, did you want to add a few things to that?
No, I'm good.
You're good. Okay. He also has three lovely children, two lovely children and a dog that is Chinese.
It's technically three then, yeah.
And we're thrilled to have Freddie. We have a long history with P&G and really excited to have him talk a little bit about what they've done. Mita Mallick. Mita is a marketing executive who has worked across a number of iconic brands, including Aveeno, Avon, Vaseline, and Chapstick. She is currently the head of Equity, Inclusion, and Impact at Carta. And in addition to working at Carta, she contributes regularly to a number of publications, including Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Business Insider, and writes extensively about inclusion, equity, and diversity. And if you haven't had a chance to look up some of her writing, please do. I just love the work that she's doing in terms of amplifying voices of systemically excluded individuals and communities. Also, Mita is the creator and co-host of Brown Table Talk podcast, which is another fantastic podcast that I listen to often. Thank you, Mita, for coming today.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, Brittany. Brittany is the Associate Director of Influence at Citizen Relations. She is also the co-founder of Influencer League and a thought leader in the influencer marketing space and a content creator. And Brittany created Influencer League, which is an online platform to help educate and empower diverse content creators. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to hear a little bit about the work you're doing through Influencer League. So today, I'd like to first start off about just touching on the evolution of the marketing landscape in relation to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We've seen a lot of changes in the last decade, specifically in the last 3 years. It's been astronomical in the way people want to live their lives, how they want to work, and what their expectations are from what they buy and the services they use. And so, Freddie, I was wondering if you could start by telling us how has this evolution, what does it look like in the world that you live in, and how has that impacted how you do your work at P&G?
Okay, can you hear me back there? Yeah, okay. So first of all, thank you again, Shilpa, and it's just a great honor for me and I think for all of us to be here today, and for the few people that I have had the honor of meeting this afternoon. I think a lot of you have great stories to also share. So, please, after this also, let's just get to know each other a little more. I'm lucky to be here on this platform. So there has been change, and there has been, I think significant change. It started probably like 10 years ago, but as you said, there's been a bigger acceleration in the last 3 years. How did it affect our work? Very transparently, if I had to just actually talk about my own businesses, I would say that we actually saw acceleration happen more like 3.5 years ago. And it actually didn't happen. There is a lot of change happening in the external environment. I think we only go where consumers go, and consumers are becoming more demanding. Consumers are expecting more. But our starting point in this particular case was very interesting. It wasn't actually consumers, as strange as that might sound. It had actually happened because of a young leader in my organization. So I run the Asia Pacific network for Procter & Gamble, and so I do these fireside chats, which don't have a fireside. They kind of have some good food, which allows younger leaders to come in. And one of the younger leaders, this is 3.5 years ago when I was like 1 and a bit years in the US, he asked me a question. P&G is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. And his question was, why should I hang out in P&G when you and others say that we have a great culture of inclusion, when I don't see any products, any design, any advertising, any programs for Asian American consumers? Like, can you explain that to me? And I actually give people awards for what I call, because I work on deodorants as well, like Old Spice and Secret. I'm like, if you can make me sweat, I'll give you an award. And this one I regretted. I'm like, oh shit, I don't have an answer for this one. So I actually stepped back and I thought in all humility that this young leader made a lot of sense. And so I kind of then wrote a note. If you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, right? One of those purpose notes. I wrote a long note. I didn't get fired for it, but I did write a note about to my leadership team about like the culture of inclusion and the fact that we don't have what we need, and that affects our internal culture. And my leadership team responded really, really well, and from that was created a framework that we call diversity beyond the numbers. Now, why is it diversity beyond the numbers? Because we had the numbers. We actually had the numbers. So one of the first things I did when I came in was to make sure that we had a balanced, diverse team. I mean, 55% of my leadership, my vice presidents are women, and 55% are multicultural. So the numbers were not the problem. The problem was the culture. And so we had to kind of talk through, so what do we need to do to change kind of what we do internally and externally? And that led to very deliberate change in the conversations on innovation. When we talk about skin, we talk about like, why do all the products have to be the same? It's simple to keep everything running on the same line with one item, but can we adjust the innovation? Do we need to think about the ingredients that go in that are different for different consumers across the US? A lot of our African American guys were talking about ashy skin and saying like, hey, your products in Old Spice don't actually solve that, and frankly, nothing does. So should we get our technologists to be working on something that takes that to the next level? Do we actually work on our media and our reach to be very deliberate about reaching these consumers in a way that is resonant and authentic and representative in an authentic kind of way? And all of that, we changed all of that. And we are in the process of still changing it. And it's not about just changing it on the surface, because you can change it on the surface. You can essentially show multicultural protagonists in an advertising piece. That's not what I'm talking about. That's just one very small part of the equation. It's the entire way we do business. So be it business reviews or be it innovation reviews, or be it the way we would have our conversations on consumers or research, technical research, consumer research. Do we have inclusion of LGBTQ+? Do we have inclusion of multicultural consumers? Do we have inclusion of people with disabilities? Are we creating that inclusion framework? And what was powerful about that is the businesses have responded really well because of it. So there's a case for business in it too. But I think what's really powerful is, when you think about creating a culture of inclusion where people want to come in and give their best shot. It's a great feeling to be sitting in a room and listening to everyone else who doesn't look like you or sound like you, talking about people who are like you. And then you feel like you can contribute even more insightfully to that conversation, no matter who you are in that equation. So I think that's how we did our change. And I think we were lucky we did it then. We've expanded that program across the entire enterprise. So it started in personal care, but it's expanded. But I think I'm glad we did it then because of that one courageous leader who kind of asked that tough question.
It's interesting you mentioned the word courageous, because I feel that now more than ever there's the need for courageous leadership and action-oriented leadership. And it's wonderful that Procter & Gamble saw that sooner than most have seen. Mita, how have you seen the landscape change? Because in your writing, you write a lot about what other companies are doing. And so you have an interesting overview of what's happening in this space.
Well, first I'll say thanks for having me. I'm here for Shilpa. Citizens is very lucky to have you. We met 2 years ago, the power of LinkedIn. You asked me to come do a talk for your team. And so this is the only advertising week event I'm attending. But Shilpa, you're amazing, so thank you. I sit in a unique advantage point. I run diversity, equity, inclusion at a fintech startup. I'm a recovering consumer product goods marketer, so I also write for Adweek. And I think there's 3 things I'm seeing. There's still a lot of diversity washing happening from the diversity tipping point of May 2020 with the murder of George Floyd and all of the promises that were made. Oh, it's Hispanic Heritage Month tomorrow. What are we going to do? Black History Month is February 1st. Every single day. And so why, we know that that's always that year. Why are we constantly rushing for these heritage months? And there's so much pressure because we're not doing things the right way. You know, it was interesting, not too long ago on Instagram, I saw a beauty brand I won't name, Prestige, not P&G, don't worry. Beautiful image of a Black woman with stunning makeup, dark-skinned, and I was like, if that's gonna work on her skin tone, it's gonna work on mine. I try to look up the brand. They don't actually sell products that work. It's called diversity dressing, right? There's no eyeshadow, there's no foundation, there's no blush, and so that's the stuff you're seeing, which consumers will very quickly call you out on. Number 2, I think the half glass full person in me is there's a lot of brands getting it right, and even before we met earlier today, Procter & Gamble brands, Sephora I'm a big fan of, Adidas. I think also just if you look at content, Netflix, Bridgerton 2, I'm a big fan of. Disney, Miss Marvel. There's this whole movement you're seeing that it's not just about talent in front of the camera. What is happening? We were just talking about it at our table. Who's sitting at the table and who has a voice, who has power of the pen. There's a lot more movement around that. I think the third thing that's really interesting is the rise of the micro-influencer, which I will call the employee. And we are so focused on who we're gonna sell how much to and how fast that we forget about the people internally. So when I'm working with brands, I ask, you're going to do this huge initiative for Black History Month. Have you talked to your Black employees about it? And it's not their burden, right? But would they actually say, this is my experience of working here when they see the Instagram post? And sometimes they don't, and that's where we see misses happen.
Thank you, Mita. You've raised so many interesting points in particularly the diversity washing and what we see, and also just the business case. It was, I think, maybe Ty's. I don't think Ty's here, but she just stepped out. She was on a panel yesterday that I was sitting at, and it was a chief equity diversity officer of the BBDO who was speaking, and he had said it's no longer about the business case anymore. It's the right thing. Like, it makes your company resilient. It makes your company better, and it will make your company last much longer if you start to think about this in this way. Brittany, your work, well, how, in terms of Influencer League and what you do around influencer marketing, how have you seen the landscape change? Because we've seen quite an uptake in influencer marketing.
So, yeah, as Shilpa mentioned, I am the founder of the Influencer League, Associate Director of Influence at Citizen, and I'm also a creator myself. And so a lot of these answers, you're going to see me switch back and forth between the agency, speaking on the agency side, speaking on the creator side, founder side, or an influencer side. And so one of the largest impacts that we saw, as Mita mentioned, in 2020, height of the Black Lives Matter summer, is that we saw a lot of influencers really coming to understand how fairly large the Black buying power was. The Influencer League, in partnership with MSL, back in December 2021, released the Time to Face the Pay Gap Influencer Study. And one of the startling facts that we saw that we've known for years is that African Americans have $1 trillion buying power. If we were our own country, the GDP would be like the 3rd largest in the entire world. Like, that's how massive it is. And so when you think about that from a marketing standpoint and not seeing that diversity, it flows into the work that we do on the agency and brand side as we work with influencers and not having that diversity. And so that really came to a pivotal moment during the pandemic, during the Black Lives Matter summer, was, we have this buying power, but influencers, Black influencers specifically, brown influencers specifically, are not getting the equity and attention that we deserve as creators. You know, we're not being put on brand campaigns. When you see a press trip, it's nothing but white women who all look the same on this press trip. And that's really where that impact came. And a lot of the work that I was able to do, you know, as a creator as well as through the Influencer League was start working on that study and start bringing the influencer pay gap to light. And so one of the things that the study uncovered was that there was a 35% pay gap between Black and white influencers. And it's not just, we were talking this morning at breakfast about, you know, knowing these stats and being able to tell everyone else about these stats, but what's the work that follows it? And so the work is going to have to continue, but the largest impact from that was, you know, putting more Black and brown influencers on campaigns and being very diligent about it. It can't just be you know, an afterthought. It has to be intrinsic. It has to be something that, you know, you don't give a second thought to. You have to put people on your teams who look like the influencers that you want on those campaigns. So that's really the biggest impact that I saw from it from an economic standpoint is you know, the diversity in the campaigns and on the teams as well.
So we did that study. I remember still sitting in the citizen office, and I'd only been there a couple months, and I wanted to have a better sense of how different ethnic communities were utilized. They're connecting to marketing, and I was frustrated by the lack of data in Canada, and there was more in the US, but still not enough. And I thought, if we have so much buying power and the world is becoming more and more diverse, why don't we understand how these variety of different communities are connecting to marketing, and why are we not speaking to them in a far better way than we're currently speaking with them? And so when we did that study, we surveyed over 2,500 individuals across US and Canada, and we also had focus groups with influencers from diverse backgrounds to really get an understanding of how the space comes together and what does authentic influencer, inclusive influencer marketing mean. And in that study, we identified 4 pillars or components. One was connection. The other was understanding the channels that different ethnic groups use. We learned that more and more historically marginalized communities actually use social media because they're largely absent in mainstream media. So what was surprising is Indigenous and Native American communities are using TikTok far more than any other ethnic community. There's so much research on age and gender around social media, very little on ethnicity and how different ethnic groups use it. We looked at creation and the lack of working with influencers to create content, which to me is like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you work with an influencer who's from the community to create content? And finally, the last thing was commitment. Not just these one-off campaigns, but long-term commitment, not just externally, but internally, and which you talk a lot about, Freddie, too, is what the work P&G did internally as you were looking at how you were going to show up externally. And Freddie, in terms of connections, I was wondering if you could touch on how P&G has been thinking about how you connect to audiences. When we, in our study, we found the term BIPOC just does not resonate. It's just lumping everyone together, and it's another way of erasing all of these unique identities. People resonated much more when you were showing someone from their community, and were likely to take action when that information was coming from someone from their community. And at P&G, you've done some amazing work in terms of how you're connecting with the African American community. Could you touch a little bit on that?
Sure. You know, so we at P&G, we have acronyms for everything. So it's part of our confidentiality strategy. Even if the competition gets the document, they have no idea what we're talking about. So we have in this space, and I was actually just talking with our Canadian team yesterday about this, because we have a huge Asian Canadian population out there in Canada, and we don't, I think same point that I was making earlier, we don't actually authentically and holistically serve them as we should. But when it comes to connection and communication, the model, we call it a 4R model, and but it's very similar to kind of some of what you just said. I guess the first is reach, right? I mean, if you can't reach the right community in the right way, in the right space, I'll build on that. Actually, it's not just reach, because you could reach a consumer through generic content media platforms as well. But you got to reach them in a place, in a way that is where they engage, where they really engage. And I think key opinion leaders is one of those kinds of spaces, which is why what you just said on the Native American pieces holds so much logic. So reaching them is the first step, because if we ain't reaching them, then, I mean, everything else falls from there. The second R we talk about is representation. So now this is representation behind the camera. So at least in P&G, we're getting very, very particular about making sure that the directors we choose, the not just the director, but the advertising agencies, are they well represented? Because if they aren't, actually the work gets weaker. So, but it's also about representation in front of the camera. But representation, I really resonated to some of what you said, Mita. Representation is great. And I'll give an example now that you talked about what you said, brainwashing, diversity brainwashing. Was it diversity?
Diversity washing.
Diversity washing, not brainwashing. I'm going to use that when I go back. Yeah, like, can I borrow? Yeah, okay. Do I have to pay you for that? No, okay. Good, okay.
I borrowed it from someone else.
Okay, okay. So, but the representation in the authentic way, representation in the way that is the right way matters. You can stereotype and put representations in there and essentially actually work against the goal versus for the goal. I'll talk about this example that, as you were talking, suddenly struck me. But let me go to the third R. The third R is relevancy. So this is about deeper insights, and P&G is all about insights and trying to understand the unique insights, the unique life insight of the consumer and the multicultural consumer, the unique category insight. And then the last one, and probably the most important that connects all of this, is resonance. Because at the end of the day, what you want to do is create a real connection, a real engagement. If you don't have the reach and you don't have the representation, you don't have the relevance, you probably won't get to resonance. But even if you have those three, you might still not get to resonance if you don't curate that and craft that right. And I think working those 4 R's kind of like is the way we kind of try to thread that needle and do it holistically and well. And then back to diversity washing, when I came onto this personal care business, when I came to Cincinnati 4.5 years ago, we had a decent Old Spice business. Hopefully some of you guys use Old Spice. Huh? Whew. So, and our business has been growing. We've been growing around mid-digit levels, so 5% year on year when we came in. And we always used African-American protagonists, Terry Crews and stuff like that, Isaiah. And those were good campaigns, right? Except that when you actually talk to African-American men, they weren't very impressed. And we did a lot of African-American men work because we were making the deliberate effort for representation in front of the camera. And African-American guys said 2 things. First of all, like this Terry Crews kind of like, popping his chest and, like doing all these things. They're like, that ain't cool, man. I mean, like that's not us. We don't find that cool and we don't like you. And they were very direct about it, so it was good. And the second thing that they talked about was they felt like we didn't have products for them. I kind of was touching on that before. They didn't feel like we were showing them in the right light, in the right way, with the right aspiration. So we had to go back and say, so what are we going to do about this? This is now, clearly a surprise for us. But actually, when you looked at our data, can you believe that we were doing, I think 80% of our representation was African-American guys talking on the camera, and our penetration was declining dramatically. In fact, they told us, what they said? They said, you have a black man making white jokes. And I was like, okay, like I'm brown, I have no idea what you're talking about. I came in from China, but fine, okay, thank you. So it was just interesting to understand what the consumer was feeling and what they were saying, So what we did then was we changed a lot of things back, and we had this conversation then on whether we were like just doing it for the sake of doing it or doing it really holistically and authentically. And so we went into our technologists and said, we need formulations that are heavier in moisturizing, ingredients like shea butter and oils that are heavier in moisturizing because these consumers need it. So, and they were like, well, it's Old Spice, it should be about scent. And we're like, well, thank you for the scent, but here's what we need, right? So the technologists are like, okay, you are the boss, we'll find it. we then had to go and look at how do we talk about this. So we actually had to change our look, tone, and feel of part of the Old Spice line and create the Gentleman's Blend, which is kind of a bone-colored bottle that actually has these better technologies in them with the right ingredients that connect with the guy. We then made a choice of taking off the old advertising and putting in a new set of advertising, which was called Men Have Skin Too. And essentially, it's an insight that works for, I think, all guys. It definitely works for me. My wife, when we be at the table, I'd say, do you want to order a dessert? And she'd be like, no, I don't want anything. Like, do you want this? No, I don't want anything. Suddenly, I'm looking, my chips, my fries are all eaten up, my dessert's half gone. And I'm like, why don't you just order your own damn thing? I mean, I'm happy to love and share and all that stuff, but just, we have the money, you can buy your own thing, right? And everything is all about women. All of beauty care is about women. I mean, hey, can I at least have a body wash for myself? Like maybe I can have my own guy thing. So that was the insight that kicked it off. But we brought Dion in a family setting where he was having this argument with his wife who was taking his lavender product or his Shea Moisture product and saying like, hey, what are you doing? Give me back my stuff. Men have skin too. And interestingly, we showed the protagonist in that sense in a very authentic way. We created Hispanic advertising on it, we created white advertising on it, we created Asian American advertising, different with key opinion leaders and stuff as well. And the business is now for the last couple of years, 2 to 3 years now in double-digit growth. So the brand is exploding, not just in the US now, but globally in double digits. And this has been a core part of it. So these 4 R's allowed us to kind of serve consumers better. But I'll be honest, back to the point I made on diversity beyond numbers, we have a great amount of people who are so keen to hang out with Old Spice because of what we do in that sense. So back to your point on, part of the audience is internal. That's really helped us too.
Just in terms of what you said, 2 points. One, we were talking about this morning. I had my husband watch The Look, and I was telling Freddy and a few other people that to watch him as an African man and a black man watch that, for me, like even now just thinking about it makes me feel just tears, because I hear about his experiences as a black professional, but to see him watch and how it connected with him and to see the emotion in his face was so profound, because he is not an emotional person, but to see how you touched him in such a deep way was just, it meant so much to me. Yeah. The second point is, all of this change that you're talking about costs money. Yeah. How were you able to convince, because often we hear, well, we don't have the budget, we can't do this, we can't. So how were you able to push for that?
It comes back to what Brittany talked about, which is, there is a business case for this too. I mean, you said it was the 3rd largest economy in the world. So I believe that when you do good things and do the right things, good things just come back. And while we can't share any stuff right now, it does make that impact when you do those right things in the right way. So I was just meeting with leadership from Family Dollar last week. I think I mentioned it this morning, and I just mentioned it. Please don't reach out to Kyle. But I actually had a moment where he choked up in the meeting because, you can check this out on YouTube or whatever. It's not been actually publicized yet, but it's called These Hands. And it's a story of a young African-American kid throwing the football and the belief that, he's going to become a great sportsman. And his dad's telling him, you can do that with these hands, but you can also do all these other things. You can be an astronaut, you can be a doctor, you can be this. As the ball's flying through the air, that's what the ad tells them. And Kyle and I and the other leader in the room, all 3 of us broke out into tears, because every time I see the ad, I get super emotional. And like the meeting just completely, I thought we'd be talking about pricing. It's dollar stores, right? I'm like, why are you taking pricing, inflation? We ended up in a whole different space in that meeting because he could relate to that. So there's just stuff, and I'll probably send you the link later, but y'all should check that out, just to give an example of what can be done. It's not publicized really, but it's powerful.
Please do share it, and if you share it with us, we'll ensure that everyone here gets the link so that you can look at it. Mita, in terms of commitment, and you again talk quite a bit about this, and what I like that you've touched on is the need for commitment, not just in terms of how you market, but how you function as a company. And recently, I was reading your Adweek article on the NFL and how they were trying to connect with the Latinx community during Hispanic Month. And you, the way you present where there was an opportunity and how it was a missed opportunity. It comes from a place of compassion and kindness and wanting to move people into the right direction. Can you talk more about and this is just one article, but I've read a number of things you've written. Can you talk more about the idea of commitment and what does it take? Because we hear a lot.
It's working. I think it's working, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the NFL wasn't happy that I wrote that piece. They came after me for that. I think there are three things, and I think the first thing is really about building trust as a team before you build trust with your consumer. And I'll mention the NFL briefly. You can read the Adweek piece. I think there's a lack of trust within the team that happened there, because most of the time when you see the misses, I'll be very blunt, racist, sexist, homophobic content that's out in the landscape, somebody internally said something. And we were talking offline earlier. I've been a part of some pretty big crises, and one major one where there was someone junior in the room who said, "This makes me feel uncomfortable." She didn't have the language to say what that meant. And I remember the senior head of market research saying it was green tested, it was tested. And then 8 billion impressions later, right? And so I always say, listen to the whispers, they're the loudest. You have to have trust within your team to say, why are we casting racially ambiguous models? Why are we asking this person to straighten her hair? Why are we perpetuating a stereotype about Black mothers? Like, if you can't say that within your team, I mean, I don't know how you expect for the consumer to trust you. I think the second thing is around be ready to apologize. My husband's not here, but I'll make a joke about him. No non-apology. I'm sorry I made you feel that way. And our relationships with people are just like brands. It's like, you make the mistake, be ready to apologize, and talk about what you did wrong so we can learn from it, which is why, actually, with compassion and kindness, whether it's the NFL or other misses, it's like, let's learn from history so we don't repeat it. I'm not trying to shame or blame people. I'm just saying this could happen to anybody, so be ready to apologize. And I think Sephora, and for full disclosure, I'm an advisor of their Beauty Accelerator program, but from what they did from the time they were accused of a racist incident in store back in 2018, they close their stores down, they do a day of training. They then commission the largest study in retail around racial bias. They have an accelerator program to get more Black and brown founders on shelf. And now they have a pledge called Open to All. J. Crew, Ben & Jerry's, like, they're trying to change the industry. So that is what it means to do better and be better after you apologize. And the third is around, I mean, we were chatting, I can now lovingly talk about how much I love P&G now that I don't work at Unilever, but this idea of like cooperation and building bridges with competitors. And I think another piece I recently wrote was around Adidas and SoulCap. And if you've covered Adidas, if you've watched what Adidas has been doing, they were raked over the coals in 2018 by the New York Times for not being an inclusive environment. And they have done so much work since then, and they really wanted to tackle what it means to be a titan in the industry and be inclusive for all sports, including swimming. And so they ended up partnering with SoulCap. Please look them up. They're founded in 2017, 2 Black founders out of London who, from their own childhood experiences, realized that nobody in their families actually were swimming or ever swam. And so they created an inclusive cap for voluminous hair. So Adidas could have just copied that. And that would have been horrible. But it's actually this idea of large corporations looking at smaller companies as influencers and lifting them up and saying, we're gonna actually work with you together on this mission.
Thank you, Mita. I know we're running short of time, but I want to ask Brittany you one last question, and then we'll have an abrupt end. But Brittany, in our research, when we talked to influencers, what it was astonishing was almost every single influencer had said the lack of content creation with them, and one of them had said to us how they just get a script from PR and they're supposed to just speak, say whatever's in there, not deviate, and those those ads never perform well, never. And I was at a Adweek panel yesterday on podcast that I think Rena was on, and they also spoke about how when they're given an ad for a podcast, the ones that require that script never do well. Yet, and then I asked this influencer, why do you think that is, if you actually have the data? And she was saying that when they get the brief from the script from the marketing manager just wants to do what the boss said. That's it. Just, this is what my boss wants, I got to do what the boss said. And the influencer spoke about the need for the executive level to be more diverse, so that at the very top, that script is more thoughtful, more reflective, and connects with the influencer's audience. What is your experience around content creation, and how do you think, is that what we need? I think one of the things we need is more diversity in all parts of an organization. But what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So from that connection piece that you were just speaking about earlier, I think a large part of the success of the Influencer League, and as well as me just building my brand as a creator and a founder, is that authenticity. And the Influencer League doesn't have 4 R's, but we teach the 3 R's: reach, relevance, and resonance. And it's about that authenticity. And as a content creator, if you can't just enter Black Twitter, it's a thing, but you have to be a part of Black Twitter to be there. That's where you see a lot of that authenticity and creativity. The same goes for TikTok. If you think about the dance challenges that you see on there, if you think about really a lot of what drives most of these social media apps, it's what Black and brown creators, more specifically Black creators, are creating. And so when it comes to the actual content creation from an ad standpoint, there's no relevance there, there's no resonance there. So if I were to do an ad right now, and I have this brief, and I normally see this from a lot of the medical or medicine type of brand deals. So like just recently I did a 1-a-day postnatal brand campaign, and when you do those type of campaigns, they're a lot more strict with guidelines, but even then the authenticity still has to be there for my audience, because my audience is primarily Black women who are mothers. Like, it has to resonate. And so I think that is the biggest piece, is you need, like I mentioned earlier, you need people on the team who can understand that. So if I'm in charge of putting together a brief for influencers, and I know that there's going to be primarily Black influencers on this campaign, we have the opportunity to give them the room to be themselves. Growing up, I'm from Mississippi, so if you hear the Southern drawl, that's why. Growing up in Mississippi, we have, African American vernacular English, which is actually a form of English. It's real. And growing up, you say certain things like finna or fixin' to, and you get corrected all the time, like, no, it's about to. You're about to do this. But finna and fixing to, those are actual words in African American vernacular English. And so I think we've just gotten so ingrained in us that to be able to show up in a certain way and be taken seriously, that we have to come at it from a way that makes sense to a white audience. If we're working with a brand, more than likely our brand manager is probably white, and so we're having to assimilate. And so I think a huge reason why the Influencer League is so successful is that, number one, it's woman-founded, Black woman-founded, and we've instilled in our creators through that education that it's okay to be authentic. Look at the type of content that you're sharing when it's not a brand deal, and look how well it does, as opposed to, an ad that you're doing. It's okay to speak up and say, my audience isn't really going to like this. It's not going to resonate with them. If we're doing this campaign, obviously you want the engagement, you want the impressions, you're looking for that return on investment. Allow me to use my voice in the way that I normally would, so that it can resonate with this particular audience. That's the reason you chose me, correct? And so we empower a lot of our creators to speak up and really advocate for themselves, and hoping that in the future we see that a lot more. But as you mentioned, it starts from the top. We have to have people on our teams who look like us, who can understand that.
Thank you. I want to sneak in one last question. Sorry, Jess. And it just has to do with representation and the power of representation and how you see that play. I know for me, having biracial children and seeing how they walk into a space and know that they belong in that space and expect to see themselves is so different from how I grew up. And now in my role, I feel as a gatekeeper, I have the privilege of having a panel like this and speaking to you and asking you to share to the audience that isn't as diverse as maybe this panel is. And I take that role very seriously as a gatekeeper. It's exhausting, but it's a very important role. And I know that when I'm up here, women like me see me, and that matters. So Fred, and if you don't, I'd love to know, what does this mean to you, power of representation? How does it play out in your personal life as a person of color, and then in your professional life? And I have the same question for all three of you.
I'll make it snappy. It means a lot. I've been in many parts of the world and been the only person that's different in color, different in style, different in experience, different the way I communicate, and felt like the outlier. So I think it means a lot to me, and I think all of us in this room and beyond should do our part to kind of, because my mom taught me every drop fills the ocean. So we can all do our parts in driving the right representation. And you talked about the talk, and we created the name, which was just recently, it was an Asian American thing, but it actually appeals to everyone, which is acceptance in the pronunciation of a name. All acceptance starts with you getting the name right. These are kind of things that matter a lot to me. I'll just say one last thing. It matters actually a lot even for the business. Because I truly believe this at the bottom of my heart, that I think when you have everyone if everyone looked like me, sounded like me, talked like me, thought like me, had knowledge like me, and experience like me in my leadership team, 1 + 1 = 0.9. Because you waste time. I might as well have just made the decision myself. When everyone looks different, has different thought, different style, different opinions, different diversity and representation, 1 + 1 can equal 3, 4, 5, 6, you name it. So I believe in it from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
It makes my heart sing, right? Means we matter, our stories matter, our communities matter. Life imitates art, art imitates life. I think it reflects what's happening in our workplaces. If you're so upset about Ariel being a black mermaid, what does that mean about how you feel about what's happening in your workplace? So I'm here for all of it. I believe in Black Santa, Black Mermaid, people of color in Middle Earth, Black Lords and ladies flying dragons.
Thank you.
I love that answer. But yeah, it's incredibly important. Influencer marketing is changing every single day. The influencers that you see on the campaigns, it's becoming incredibly more diverse. For me, it does get tiring. Just recently, we saw a very major brand send some influencers on a press trip. This was actually like last week, and everyone on the press trip was white. But this brand is so committed to diversity, it just didn't make a lot of sense as to why every influencer on this trip was either white or Asian. There were 2 Asian women there as well. And so that type of work gets tiring because you see that we're trying to push the diversity and equity in influencer marketing, but then you see, sometimes it feels like it's a step back. But it's important to me nonetheless because, number one, where I'm from, influencer marketing does not go a long way in Mississippi. Most businesses don't care about it, but we have a lot of creative people in the state. We have a lot of creative people in our communities, but Black people in influencer marketing as a whole across the world. I know influencers all the way in Nigeria, who I've connected with. I know influencers in the UK. I know Black influencers in Canada. So just seeing the extent of what I'm doing reach people across the world is incredibly important, and it makes this type of work truly rewarding. And even when I feel like sometimes it's a step back, it gives me more motivation to keep going. And then the second thing, growing up, there are people that I know who are like, when I grow up, I want to be an actress, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a lawyer. And I didn't know a lot of women. I don't think I grew up knowing any women in marketing at all. And even going off to college, was surrounded by a lot of amazing Black women. None of them were in marketing. And so to take this path of being in marketing that turned into, influencer marketing has been incredibly interesting, because still learning a lot every day, but there are a lot of younger women who reach out to me who want to build a career in influencer marketing, who had no idea that something like this was even possible. The opportunities that we're giving, and I'll just say, access to the income that comes along with it, you normally see that from higher professionals in other areas. And so it's incredibly important to me, and something that I personally would never take for granted. So.
Thank you, all three of you. I'm so grateful for all three of you, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and being so honest and frank. I think we need more uncomfortable, honest, and transparent conversations if we're going to change and be more reflective and resonate more with the world that we're living in. So thank you all for coming, and thank you all for speaking with us.